I love how detailed the Lord is to something as silly as us doing a video and it just not working, because he cares about the ones so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
And that's even his heart for family. He cares about the inside. And so I think we are conditioned, even as Christians, that the outside is what shows success. And I think that God is coming in this moment and in this season. And he is pulling back the curtain to show his bride that it is the inside that he values so much, and it's the hidden place. It's why he pulls us away and says, come to me, shut the door, come to me in private and be with me. It's the same thing with family. I believe he is calling us to himself again. He's calling us away from the stage, and there's nothing wrong with the stage, but he is calling us back to the inside of our home, because God is such a generational God, and he is so jealous for the generations.
Yeah.
And we are losing generations. We're losing children because they're seeing that ministry destroys the home, and it doesn't have to be like that.
No.
And I believe that this next wave of revival is family.
Yes.
And it's God strengthening and nurturing and fortifying the inside of the home.
Yes.
And it starts with you, students. It starts before you're married, before you have a ministry. It's never too late if you're married to have a refresh and a restart.
Yes.
I believe that wholeheartedly. But it starts, he's calling students that are young to get back to these core things that mean the most to him, that are so on his heart right now. And I really believe that we are in a very special, beautiful moment in time.
Yes.
And I think it's very, very connected to his heart for the nations, his heart for the home, his heart for unity.
Yeah.
And when he says, Lord, make them one as my Father and I are one, oneness in the home and oneness between the body is so important to him.
Yes. You know, we, for so long, we have much that we would like to share, but the one thing that we want to make sure we leave you with is the testimony of how good God has been to us and our family. You know, for a little over 20 years now, we've been doing this full time. And for the majority of our time being involved in full-time ministry, specifically behind a pulpit pastoring, I did it all wrong. And pain became an unfortunate teacher. And I began to see that my lack of understanding what God wanted me to prioritize was hurting the very people that I loved most, which was my children, my wife. And I had to come with the clear understanding that there was brokenness on the inside of my home. There was ministry that was thriving on the outside of my home. People thought I was wonderful who stood in front of our pulpit. But then those who were in my living room were broken and being neglected. But I was never told to live life from the inside out. I went to college, and I had one class that was an elective on marriage and family. And everything else that I had was how to study right, how to preach sound doctrine, how to operate a church, how to make sure that the finances are in order, how to make sure that the expression is correct, and how to make sure that people stay in their seats, and how to make sure that you are stewarding tithing units well, and making sure that people know who Jesus is, and making sure that you live a life of evangelism. And while you're out, just simply living life, that you're doing all of these things supposedly unto the Lord. But I realized that all the resources that I was being inundated with were teaching me how to prioritize life from the outside in, as opposed to living life from the inside out. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that I was doing it wrong until my home was in disarray, until my wife was broken, and my children thought that serving Jesus brought a broken father home, brought an absent father home, a father who was depleted. I was beginning to communicate to my oldest son that, wow, I see my Baba, he calls me Baba, I see my Baba giving the best on Sundays, the best on Wednesdays, the best to strangers and to staff. And yet I'm asking him to come play football with me and he's too tired. And it seems as though those people are getting the best of him and I'm getting the scraps. And pain became a teacher that I realized, wait, what am I doing? I'm supposed to be serving Jesus. I'm supposed to be serving the one who loves me and loves my home. And everything that Jesus did, he did out of relationship with his Father. And I realized, based on the way that I was leading my home and the brokenness that was apparent on the inside of the four walls of my home, I was doing this thing wrong. And if we have one thing that we want to share with you is, if pain doesn't have to be a teacher, then please hear our heart and learn from our mistakes. Because we know that serving Jesus should not bring a weary father and or husband home, but it should be a vibrant father and husband that walks through the threshold of that house after doing what God has asked that man and or that woman to do. Because serving Jesus should add a better husband, a better father, a better mother, and a better wife to the home. We were taught otherwise. Win the lost at any cost. And even if your family doesn't understand when they're young, they'll figure it out when they get older. And then we realize, wait, we were watching families get older and it never made sense for the children to be neglected. And it still doesn't make sense for a child to be neglected. And then we have the beautiful privilege of being able to be around some incredible men and women of God. And we honor them and we love them. And we had to chew the meat and spit out the bones. But some of the bones that we saw were, men and women who could pack rooms with people, but they couldn't pack a living room with their family. And that broke our heart because we felt like you should be able to do both. And you should be able to come back from an incredible meeting to a home and to a living room where your children and your wife are celebrating and affirming you, or vice versa, where the husband is affirming the wife, or whatever it might be. But there should be a sense of celebration attached to the ability to be used by God and do great things for God outside the four walls of your home. But at the same time, a child should be able to look at the man behind the pulpit and see that same man in the living room. And I realized for me that I had not been communicating that. And it's all because really the woman sitting next to me, she refused to settle for anything less than what God wanted for our family. When I met her at ORU, obviously she comes from a ministry family, and I was thinking, man, a great way to close this deal is to just tell her what I want to do. And she's like, so what do you want to do what do you want to do with your life? And I was like, I want to be a preacher. And I was thinking that would seal it. And she's like, I don't know if I want a preacher. She's like, I was hoping you'd be a business guy. I'm like, I can be that too. But the reason that she was hesitant was because she had experienced some things. And I made this promise to her. I said, I'll never do that. I'll never not prioritize my home. And in a short period of time, just like Peter, the very thing I said I would never do, I ended up doing. And the very man I said I would never become, I ended up becoming. And it's so easy for that to happen if you don't have the priority established on the inside and you understand that life is meant to be lived from the inside out. And she's really the one who made sure that I understood, hey, you promised me something and you weren't living it. And if you want this marriage to work, if you want this family to work, then I really need you to hear my heart. And you begin to share your heart on what you felt was necessary for us after a decade of full-time ministry, and share that conversation that really put us into the place that allowed us to be where we are today, seeing life rightly.
I think for us, I grew up in ministry and my parents are wonderful people. There was just a lot of different things that I saw growing up that caused me to have a very jaded perspective. And just like what Theo was saying, that you win the cost you win the lost at any cost really. And you probably won't have a strong family if you're in ministry because it's difficult to do both, but your kids will understand later. And what we're seeing is a generation that just doesn't want it. And so for us, and for me, especially since I was a young girl, I had this innate, just maybe stubbornness that I just felt I know now was the Holy Spirit, that I don't think it has to be this way. I don't think it's one or the other. I think you can have both. And I don't think that it comes easy. Nothing worth anything comes easy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I think in that moment for us, what it looked like, the Lord is so, he values hiddenness. the secret place is everything to him.
Yes.
And so like I said earlier, I think we are a little bit conditioned to find success to be externals. And that's natural, that's human, that's everywhere around us. But I think to the Lord, I think when we get to be with him, I think we're going to be surprised when he says the first will be last. I think we're going to be surprised that we are going to see maybe men and women that were in caves somewhere and didn't have a big crowd. And there's nothing wrong with big crowds at all.
Or
but they were
in their kitchens.
Yeah, they were just
their
loving
tables.
Jesus, and they are the greats to the Lord. I don't know what the first being last fully means, but I know for me and for our home that we felt the Lord strip us of everything.
Yeah.
And we felt him invite us into a season of hiddenness where he said, I want you to be done with stage ministry. I want to draw you to myself. And I want you to do two things. I want you to tend to the heart of me, tend to the heart of the Lord, and tend to the heart of your home.
Yes.
And I'm going to reteach you from a foundational place what it looks like to live from the inside out and how much it means to me. And so it sounds beautiful now, and we have a really beautiful story.
It's painful.
But at the time, it was horrible. It felt like being misunderstood by people. Like, are you crazy? What are you doing? Why are you quitting? But the Lord was stripping us. And in his love, he did not give us what we thought we wanted, which was success man's way.
Thank God we didn't get it.
He didn't allow it. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. And honestly, it probably saved our marriage.
Yeah.
I'm pretty positive it did. But more than that, it brought us into this beautiful, holy, sacred invitation with the Lord to be able to find his heart in this area.
Yeah, and a lot of what we noticed, even prior to the Lord saying, hey, I need you to put a reset and a pause on what you've been accustomed to doing for a decade, which in essence was ministry from behind a pulpit on a stage. I want you to unplug. I want you to come away with me. He tucked us away in North Carolina. We spent time tending to his heart privately, tending to the heart of our home. We finally captured something that had been missing. Our children began to glow, and they were so happy to have mom and dad in the house present.
We encountered Jesus together like never before.
I've never experienced a season
At the
like
Lord's
it. Pleasure. And I remember too when we had multiple opportunities to do some things during that time that we were kind of tucked away, and without hesitation it was a no, because we had finally captured something that I didn't want to let go of. And it was, this is exactly what God has created in the earth to reveal who he is to the earth.
Yes.
And he does so. And if you think about it, in Genesis, he creates man and he creates woman. And there is this assignment: be fruitful, multiply, subdue, and have dominion. But in the fruitfulness and the multiplication, in order for that request of the Lord to be fulfilled, Adam could not do it alone. He had to do it with Eve. And because the two in that moment were able to be unified as one, and God blessed them, and there was a sense of unity in the home, and through that unity, there would be multiplication, they would bear children, that the image of God would be revealed to the earth, one family at a time.
That's good.
And so you think, if God wanted to reveal himself, he could have created a crowd. He could have created a whole bunch of people, hundreds. But instead, he created a family. The first thing he did was create a family. And that family would reveal who I am to their children, and so on and so forth. You'd begin to see the power of the illustration that was communicated privately. And you would see how it would influence the children and what they did, both private and public. You would see that the deficiencies, if you go through the genealogy of the children, weren't just simply something that they came up with on their own. It was something that they captured at home.
Yeah.
That's when I began to realize, wait, I have an incredible privilege and an honor to reveal who God is to my children. That if my children never see God and or hear God, if they look at the way their mother and father talk, if they look at the way they love each other, and when they miss the mark, they ask for forgiveness, when they tend to each other, by the way that we love each other, our children are seeing who God is. Now, the opposite can play into that principle as well. A lack of intimacy, a lack of gentleness, kindness, the beautiful characteristics of who Jesus is, a sense of neglect and silence in the home, create an illustration that contradicts who God is. And so God wants to fill the earth with himself, but he does so one family at a time. And Rach is absolutely right. There is a statistic that was generated a few years back with Fullerton, Barna, and Lifeway. It basically was a whole list of things pertaining to pastors, people in full-time ministry, and how their family felt about being involved in full-time ministry. 80% of families who are in full-time ministry felt like ministry was detrimental to their home. Of the 80%, there were children that are supposed to be the successors of what God is doing in mom and dad. They're the ones who are supposed to be doing greater things than their mother and father. In essence, receiving the baton of who God is and what God has called their family to, rejecting the opportunity to be a successor in whatever it was that their family was doing because they saw something that was unhealthy. And as a result of the illustration that was communicated in the home privately, the children said, I don't want anything to do with God, private and or public. And as a result of that, we are seeing the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, when it comes to Isaac taking on what God has asked him to do, he says, I don't want that because I have been a part of a family that has been broken, not prioritized. Ministry is everything. Marriage is secondary. I am secondary, and I don't want my children to have to experience what I've experienced. Well, an entire nation in the scriptures forget about God because of a lack of proper illustration privately, and as a result of them neglecting displaying God's ways and beginning to talk about God in the home privately, an entire nation forgets about God corporately. We've said, well, if a nation forgot about God because they stopped displaying God in the home privately, then the solution to awakening a nation to who God is begin displaying who he is privately and beginning to communicate to your children, this is who God is. And we then have the privilege of being able to love our spouse, to love our children, the same way that Jesus has loved us. And Jesus said, by the way you love, the world will know that you're my disciple. Well, I would hate for the world to know I'm a disciple of Jesus and my family not know if I'm a disciple of Jesus. I want my family to know first that I'm a disciple of the Lord, and then I want the world to know that I'm a disciple of the Lord in that order. But it takes great intentionality to be able to build a life from the inside out. We love you guys. We'll see you in a bit. Bye-bye.